So can you tell us about your experience with breast cancer?
Yes, I can. I was diagnosed with breast cancer in March 2004 when I had my second mammogram. It came as a total shock because I'd always self-examined and thought that I was absolutely fine, bearing in mind that I've always kept myself very fit because, as I said earlier, I'm doing this course to teach exercise to music to people, but I enjoy keeping myself fit. So suddenly having this diagnosis came as a total shock and a bolt from the blue. I was told on a Friday evening. I had nobody to contact on the medical side apart from my GP, who I managed to get hold of. He made an appointment for me to see him the following Monday, which I did. And by the time I walked into his office, he had already set up an appointment with a consultant surgeon the very next morning at the Cromwell Hospital in central London. It looked like whatever I had, whether it was cancer or whether it was a lump, that I was going to have a small operation, so I was very worried about that. I went off and had my consultation with the breast surgeon the next morning, and he did a small needle aspirate, which is a tiny little biopsy where they actually take out some fluid to send away to be tested. And he didn't really tell me an awful lot because at that stage they weren't terribly sure whether I had a breast cancer or not. But he promised to phone me a few days later, which he did, and he phoned me on the Friday, and I had to take the phone call while I was out in the street, and he was extremely good about it. Didn't mention the word cancer, but just said that they found something that needed to be investigated further, and there were some abnormal cells, and he was making appointments for me to go and have all sorts of diagnostic tests. Throughout this time, I kept myself very active. Right at the very beginning, I didn't want to tell anybody. I understand that this is quite normal. I was worried myself, but I was also very concerned about worrying other people until we really knew where we were. I did, however, tell a couple of very close friends. And then I found that the more people I communicated to, I got the support, which was absolutely wonderful. And for myself, I did a lot of research and I asked a lot of questions. In fact, the day of my diagnostic tests, it took up most of the day, and I absolutely bombarded everybody at every test I had with questions. In fact, the CT scanner I found absolutely amazing. I wasn't frightened at all. I was fascinated by it, and I wanted to know every single thing that they were doing to make my whole experience more, well, not so frightening for myself. Needless to say, I then had a terrible wait. I had to wait a good few days for all the results of these tests to come back, and I then had to go and have another meeting with the breast surgeon consultant, and fortunately they found that nothing had spread. But during that period it was very nerve-wracking, very nail-biting. I tried not to panic, I tried not to fast forward into what if, and as I said, I really did communicate to a lot of people, which for me, I found being single was incredibly supportive. Then the results came back and they found that I had a 1.5 centimetre malignant tumour, which fortunately hadn't spread, but I was going to have an operation. So we scheduled it in for the following Friday. I hadn't had an operation for years, so I was pretty scared about it, but he was great. I went through everything with my consultant, he answered a lot of questions, and I went off. But he also had a great nurse working with him, part of his team, who was a Macmillan nurse. So I got her email, and I consequently phoned her quite a lot and emailed her quite a lot. And again, I was finding out an awful lot of stuff for myself. But it was looking as though it was very much something that had been discovered very early on. So I was early stage breast cancer at that point. So it was looking positive. There was no discussion about radiotherapy or chemotherapy at that stage because they wanted me to have the operation, and then obviously the sample and the tumour would be sent away, and then results would come back forthwith. So I went in on the following Friday. I had the operation, which was very straightforward. I stayed in overnight. I have to say that everyone at the hospital was great. I was pretty scared about going into the operation, but that's just me. I didn't really have much to be frightened of, but I chatted non-stop to everybody and ticked everybody off because I was scared, made everybody laugh their heads off, probably overperformed and was a bit of a drama queen. But anyway, I came through it and went home on that following Saturday, and then I think I had about a week or so until I then had to go back and have another consultation with my surgeon, who wanted to see how the wound was healing, and everything was fine. And we had, I think it was 2 out of the 3 results had come back, and they confirmed that there was no spread. So that was fantastic. It was early stage, 1 centimetre malignant breast cancer in the right breast with no spread, but they were waiting now for further tests to come back to find out if I was estrogen receptive or HER2 positive. It's a bit of a complicated thing to tell people, but it's all to do with the actual type of tumour that I had and the subsequent treatment which I would go on. At that stage I was then told that I would definitely have radiotherapy with a question mark over chemotherapy. I was terrified of chemotherapy. I wasn't at all worried about radiotherapy, but I was very, very worried about the chemo. I was more worried about that than anything else because, having kept myself very fit and healthy, I knew it would be a direct impact on my immune system. So I then had to go and meet my oncologist, which I was quite nervous about, and I took along a friend to just take up the information with me. And we had a very, very long discussion. Again, we were still waiting for the result of this one particular test, but he did say he was seriously considering me having chemotherapy. Then a few days later the results came through of this other test, and they said that I was estrogen receptive, which in fact was very good news because they said I could take a drug called tamoxifen, and you can only take that if you are diagnosed with that particular type of tumour, and they said it was all looking very good for me. However, I still had to then go through the rigmarole of chemotherapy or not chemotherapy. I then had another meeting with the oncologist, and I had really defiantly made up my mind that I would resist chemotherapy at all costs. I'd done quite a lot of research. I'd been in touch with the Macmillan nurse. She'd given me some data that had come through, and it was all looking as though, yes, I may have to have it, but not 100%. I also had a discussion with my consultant, and he said he would get together with my oncologist, and eventually at this second meeting with the oncologist he said to me that if I didn't have the chemotherapy, my prognosis was still looking very good and my success rate would be about 75%. He said with chemotherapy it would be about 80 to 95%. And I said, I'm going to take the risk of not having it. And that was the most brilliant afternoon throughout that entire period. I left there, I was relieved, I was related, and I went off and had half a bottle of champagne, which I felt I really deserved.